Welcome, everyone, to episode 1 of our Enabling Automation podcast series. We're very excited to bring a series of topics to our listeners to empower them in the implementation and the support of automation projects within their organization. Our first topic is why is now the time to automate? I'll be your host of the podcast. My name is Simon Drexler. I've been in the automation industry for approximately 15 years in a variety of roles, ranging from application engineering to business leadership, as well as serving a number of different industries and phases of the automation lifecycle. My guest today is Frank Schmidt from PA Solutions. And Frank, would you take a moment to introduce yourself to our listeners?
Thank you, Simon. Frank Schmidt, as you said, responsible within PA Solutions for the process optimization business unit, where we try to help our customers to improve their processes, usually to gain efficiency, OEE, and all around that KPIs. I'm with PA since 2 years, having a background in discrete industry, more than 20 years, responsible, always related to manufacturing, so means industrial engineering, production management, site management, and I had the chance to build up several plants myself. With the step to PA Solutions, I kind of changed the side, and now doing kind of consulting work now, as I said, helping customers to improve their processes.
That's fantastic, Frank. And we're just so fortunate to have someone like you on the initial episode of our podcast to talk about how to enable and how to get started into the automation journey. It can be daunting for some, and the experience that you have both in your professional career as well as being a business leader inside of PA Solutions, which is responsible for enabling and coaching people and teams through maximizing their investment in automation, is just such a perfect fit for this topic. And so why don't we dive right in? You've got a lot of background. You're dealing with a number of different customers worldwide. Why is now the time to automate?
Yeah, I believe that currently we are living in a world of disruptions. So I see many supply chains disrupted, and this is bringing companies back to they need to set up a different footprint, maybe in some cases. They need to bring maybe formally relocated production footprint back to where they originally started, to be in a position to have material available. And we see that those customers, they are kind of desperately looking for improvement to improve their cost position overall. And so we get a lot of requests. Guys, can you help us to understand, A, could we somehow automate? And B, if yes, where would it make sense to start from?
And you mentioned an interesting word in disruption. And certainly over the last couple of years, there's been a disruption and a major change with a global pandemic, which has, I believe, forced a number of people to reevaluate their global footprint and how their products come together and come to market. I know that is the primary one, but are you seeing sort of secondary drivers and secondary reasons for that disruption and that change where we've got more people looking for automation than ever before?
Yeah, I think that the secondary triggers, and maybe there are also some primary ones, it's gaining efficiency. And I think that maybe the pandemic is kind of the trigger for we need to have a look at our processes that we maybe did not have for the last several years, and we need to start to do that. And maybe this is number one. And what we also see is that the let's say the population in some companies is aging a lot, and we also get requests from customers who say yes, we have really some trouble with finding new people, finding new talent, and we would like to get independent from this one, and to set up an automated process to be more flexible and robust in the end in the process.
And in my role, I hear that a lot as well. It's the accessibility of talent, and you touched on a couple of different reasons. Changes in population dynamics, as well as potentially an aging workforce in different areas around the world. So certainly a primary driver of the need to find a different way. Inside of that, there's a number of companies and approaches to try to make technology more accessible to these applications. Is that something that you've seen in your experience dealing with customers as well, where it's getting more straightforward to apply technology to these gaps in our processes?
Yeah, I think that the technology has improved a lot. So number one, of course, is the digitalization. So it means that the data availability is, let's say, has much improved during the last years to make data available almost everywhere and anytime. I think this is number one. And if you would like to improve and maybe to start automation, you need to have the data to understand what is going to happen or what is happening in your process in the end. So I think this is a trigger. And then also with let's say, for example, in robotics, we see many topics where also you see a next level in the next level, maybe in the technology that is available somehow, and that makes it more easy to substitute human beings in the end and to do that, implement the technology.
You touched on another thing that I'm quite passionate about, which is that fundamental and underlying data in the process. And I completely agree with you that one of the things that has become more accessible in the implementation of technology is the amount of information that we are able to pull from our processes. And what I've seen as a major trend is being able to utilize that data to justify the return on investment. So not only is it a continuity implementation of technology where maybe accessibility of talent or wanting to improve the efficiency of supply chain, as you've already mentioned, but also that we're getting much better at justifying the investment in technology because we better understand our processes. Is that something that you've seen as well?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think in the end, still there are still a few triggers to do technology or automation or not, and one of the most important one is there a business case in the end? And let's say with number one, having more data available, you can calculate maybe better than in the past what the outcome of the business case will be, and then number two, all the simulation tools that are around can also help to just justify if a automation in the end is going to work like you would how you would like to see it, right?
Absolutely. And knowing what PA Solutions does, providing that coaching and consulting of both lean process evaluation and application of automation technology on top of those assessments. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about some sort of a common outcome of those types of assessments and the data that you provide?
And maybe yes, of course. And maybe I start a little earlier in the process. So usually, quite often, customers come and say, "Hey, we have the feeling that we could do something, but we do not know exactly where and how to start, and if in the end this will pay off." And then we can go in with as you said, with a kind of assessment where we start usually to display the process in a value stream mapping, and because with this you see the process crystal clear, everybody can talk to it, everybody can understand it, and everybody usually has remarks where the weak points are. And then we can, and this is, I would say, one of the advantages of PA Solutions in this one, we can bring in lean experts, we can bring in digitalization experts, and we can bring in the automation experts. And this is in the end, let's say, from my point of view, very good and very important because if there is some gaps in efficiency or whatever detected or shown, then we can quite easily develop ideas and solutions with our experts that fit to close the gap or to improve the situation. And so I would say the triangle of the offering of PA is really addressing the lean. So to find the gap, to understand the process, the digitalization, to get the data, and then the automation possibly to improve the situation in the end. And then in between, of course, we do a business case study to calculate if the investment is worth doing it, and if the result will be like expected in the end.
You touched on another topic in that response that I think nicely ties together a number of things that we've mentioned already. There's disruption in the way that business has been done, at least in the recent history. That has companies seeking more effective ways to drive efficiency in their processes. You and I mentioned data. I know we're both passionate about it and the accessibility of data. But we didn't talk about simulation, and you just mentioned it there. And with the advances in computer software, ease of implementation, one of the trends that I've seen is that simulation is becoming more accessible, which allows that visualization and better understanding of data, better understanding of processes. Are you seeing that as a major catalyst for the investigation of technology and the implementation of automation?
To be honest, yes and no, I would say. Number one, yes, because usually with simulation, depending on how it's done, you can visualize a future state of a process. And this usually helps to get to give decision makers an idea how their process could or would look like if they do or if they make a change. So for me, this is a wonderful tool to support that, let's say, the transmission of the message on how a future state could look like. So this is number one, why I believe simulation is really helpful. And then sometimes I think it's used, unfortunately, maybe as a kind of a selling tool still a little bit. On the other hand, I see more and more companies that really would like to understand if in the process, how it's designed and set up, if there are still bottlenecks, possible problems, if the takt time is okay, and so on. So really making a technical justification if this is going to work in the end. I still see maybe it could be improved still, the number of companies using that. What we currently see, and also having the one or the other nice project, is doing really digital twins. So this is an interesting topic where companies would like to understand in a virtual room how a process in the end really behaves, and where you really can do some, influences and simulate that you would work on the process somehow and see how it would behave and what would be the outcome be in the end.
Interesting. And in the scope of today's discussion around, why is now the time to automate? Digital twin is an interesting topic as well to me, because it's being utilized as a means to either reduce the risk or reduce the implementation time of technology into the process. Are you seeing that improve throughout the analyses that you're doing and the customers that you're working with in the use of digital twin?
So we have, for the moment, I would say, only a few customers using the digital twin. And there, two topics are, I would say, most important. One is really reducing risk. So in one case, a customer is rebuilding an automated system to make training on it and to really get a smooth startup in the end. And in another case, we are talking about brackish water system, where the customer would like to understand and simulate if the one or the other pipe would be blocked, or if the one or the other pump is not running, how possible, let's say, deviations would look like, or how a workaround would look like, to instruct operators what to do next. So this is more the topics that we see, less in the context of time to market, for example, or time to set up a system.
Understood. So continuing on that path, there are new technologies coming available. There are things and tools that make the accessibility of technology more straightforward. Are you seeing automation technology applied to applications or projects where historically that hasn't been the case because of the disruption we started with?
Yes, we are seeing more and more customers that are asking for a operations assessment to gain efficiency, who are where maybe some really historically still manual work is done, and they start to write more and more in their specification explicitly, please also look for potential automation pieces where we could implement this. And so I see that maybe not only industries, but maybe also customers who used to or who are not used to automation, they start currently thinking about it and name it explicitly, that it should be on the table and on the screen, to understand if they could gain efficiency also from this one.
I really like the fact that you keep coming back to efficiency and utilizing technology to drive efficiency. And one of the things inside of the business that I'm a part of, we talk about frequently, is that technology is now being applied not to be the perfect solution, but one that will drive some level of efficiency for the manual workforce. Because if we are able to take even 10% of what has been historically manual and allow technology to drive that, then we can take 10% of our very valuable labor force and apply them to another part of the business. Is that something that you're seeing in the assessments that PA Solutions completes?
Yeah. And maybe coming back a little bit on this efficiency topic, my deep understanding, and I'm really convinced about it, is that if you start to talk about automation, you need to find the pain point that the customer is having or carrying. And if you talk to an operations responsible, what is it about in the end? It's usually about quality. It's about, let's say, delivery, so output or delivery time or whatever, or it's really about cost in the end, efficiency. And so usually one of those pain points is triggering companies to ask for help. And of course, in the end, we also had scenarios where a customer came and said, well, we are on a growth path. We are having an experienced workforce right now. We see that customer demand is really, really increasing. And we could either hire manpower over manpower, or we can use the experienced manpower that we have and try to go a next step with automation and keep the manpower on board and extend our capabilities for delivery. So this is indeed something that we see also with our customers.
I'm happy that you're seeing that trend as well. And to phrase that or frame that a little bit differently, what we're seeing is trying to apply our manual workforce to the highest value applications possible and utilize technology, again, even if it's not even the perfect solution, but utilize that to do the low value tasks. And it sounds like you're seeing that as well.
Yes. And then if you let's say if you have customers who are into that, do you have, let's say, examples or experience in mind how they are doing this? Because for me or to me, if you start automizing something that is maybe done manually before, there are a lot of potential hiccups that you can run in. So a gripper of a robot is something different than a hand of a human operator, right? And you can maybe react to small deviations with a human being that is maybe not so obvious in the beginning with an automated system or a robot. Do you see stories like this, and how do you cope with that?
And that's a great example. And I often use collaborative robots as the primary example of where you might not be applying the ideal solution, but you are applying something that is easily accessible, reasonably straightforward to apply an ROI to, and you start to break out your process into what the collaborative robot is able to do. And even if that's 10, 20, 30% of the process, even if they're slightly less efficient than the manual operator, the opportunity benefit, I would say, it's almost the opposite of opportunity cost. The opportunity benefit of being able to take that operator's time and apply it to some other part of the business to support the growing demand or the growing complexity of the product or the implementation of some new process or new part of the organization is what generally justifies the implementation of that piece of technology. And so we work with our customers in a similar way to you to analyze the process, understand where the major phases are, understand where the major validation points are, to be able to really hone in on where can we get started, how do we get moving with automation or technology.
May I have another question for you in this context?
Absolutely.
So if you work with customers, and do you have cases that they ask you to improve an existing system? And do you then sometimes, let's say, find out that the availability of the system is good, but the logistics, for example, around is the issue? Do you also have some such kind of topics?
We actually see that quite frequently. And I think it's some of those major trends that you spoke of right at the beginning of the call. The disruption of supply chain, the disruption of the availability of workforce has companies seeking new ways. And we all have limited footprint, especially inside of facilities. So we have a lot of customers, partners that come to us and say, how do we get more parts out of less space, essentially? And that has us really diving into the processes that exist. Are there ways to more effectively move parts around? Are there ways to improve or optimize the availability of individual process stations or individual steps along the journey in order to start to drive more efficiency with the ultimate goal of more parts out of less space?
Yeah, sounds interesting. Because what we always tell customers is if you have a manually done process which is bad and you just automate this, you will have an automized process which is still bad, right? So you should have a look inside before you just add a robot to see if you can get the problems out before getting it on the next technology level.
I'm fortunate to sit on a number of different boards and do a fair bit of speaking, and it comes up very often. You know, what happens when you apply technology to a bad process? You basically just get a faster, more efficient bad process. And so that is definitely something that we would encourage our listeners to avoid. And we will have a podcast actually dedicated to that topic of how to get started in the automation journey. So, Frank, to wrap up our topic for today and coming back to, why is now the time to automate? What would be the one thought or the closing thought that you would leave our listeners with?
So why is it now time to automate? I believe circumstances are triggering us to think about the processes, how we did in the past. Starting with the pandemic, with the disruptions in the supply chains and everything. This is for me number one. Number two is that, for example, war for talents, the aging of the population, not finding the right people. This is also a trigger. I think it's a good time to start now because the availability of technology is, let's say, know-how wise, really, really good. It has improved them over the last years. And to bring it into context with the processes you are having, the digitalization is also scaling up and supporting the idea of bringing in more technology and automation into processes. So that all together, from my point of view, is really a good climate, maybe to phrase it like this, a good climate to start now and to think about it now and to get into it.
What a fantastic way to summarize our topic and our talk today, Frank. Thank you so much for both your time and lending your expertise and thoughts to our listeners. Really appreciate you joining us today in our podcast for Enabling Automation. And to those listening, the next topic that we're going to talk about in our podcast is starting to debunk some of the myths that are associated with the implementation of technology, and some of the things that Frank just summarized is things are changing, technology is rapidly innovating, and that's changing the way that we implement technology in the world. So we'll debunk some of the myths that still exist in the world today as we continue on our journey of enabling our listeners to implement technology and automation in their processes. Thank you so much for listening today.